I'm Bruce Resnikoff. I'm the president of Universal Music Enterprises, which is a division of the Universal Music Group, the world's largest music company. Right now we are in the U.S. headquarters of the Universal Music Group, the West Coast U.S. headquarters in Santa Monica, California, located in what has sort of become a music row, halfway between MTV and Sony BMG, a smaller but large competitor. I run a company that effectively is responsible for all of the marketing of the music, of the catalogs of the various labels within the music group. It's the largest music catalog in the world. And by catalog, I mean effectively everything that's been recorded other than what's currently being released. So if a new artist, if you look at a band like U2, U2 has a current album, that's not really considered catalog, but everything else that it is recorded is part of our music catalog. So we have the world's largest music catalog. The company I run is responsible for the marketing through both traditional and non-traditional channels of the entire music catalog for those labels. The labels in our company are Island Def Jam, Universal, Motown, Geffen, Interscope, A&M, Mercury Nashville, numerous labels within the group, and the catalog for all those labels falls under the auspices of my company. In addition, we are also the sort of special marketing and ancillary marketing division for the company, and by that I mean, in addition to marketing the catalog, we also look for opportunities for all of the labels and albums within the music group outside of the traditional world. To some extent, it involves the digital space, but even in the brick and mortar space, it could be anything from taking music to Starbucks and non-traditional retailers like that, to doing tie-ins with corporate products, corporate sponsors. It involves placing music in films, television shows, TV commercials, video games, all things which tend to not only bring in additional revenues into the company, but tend to be additional marketing resources for music and our artists as well. The Now series is a series that was created as a partnership between Universal and EMI, and ultimately Sony BMG came into the partnership as well. And what it is a series where we release compilation albums 3 times a year, featuring some of the more current recordings by current artists, usually 18 to 20 or 21 tracks per album. From several different from the 3 different companies and the various labels on those companies. We advertise them heavily on TV through our TV marketing division and through EMI's TV marketing division as well. And we sell those typically in traditional retail stores, but we also offer them through direct response channels on TV. We launched it in 1999. Modeling it after a series that was started in the UK and had been very successful. And it was not only the first successful series to be launched on TV in the United States, but it has since then become the most successful compilation series ever launched in the United States music business. There's really 2 ways to look at catalog. There's deep catalog and there's more current catalog. And current catalog sounds like an oxymoron, but being in the music business, it's not unusual. There are lots of oxymorons. Music and business is probably one. Deep catalog could be anything going back, to Bing Crosby and to the 30s, to the 40s, to the 50s, even to 60s. More recent catalog can be anything from 70s music like Elton John and Steely Dan to 90s music, by U2 and by artists who effectively you have catalog by Britney Spears and by artists who are considered successful pop artists in the last few years or even today. So you really have to look at catalog a little bit differently. Really what catalog refers to is anything that's not actually being currently recorded for a new album project. So, typically if you look at the charts, music actually goes from the current pop charts to the catalog charts as soon as 18 months after it's released. So, if you look at the catalog charts today, you'll see albums by such quote-unquote catalog artists as Eminem, 50 Cent. I mean, these are not by no means catalog artists, but they're at the top of the catalog charts, along with, other artists such as Def Leppard, Pink Floyd, artists who you would never associate in either time frame or genre with those artists. So catalog is a misnomer in that sense. It's difficult to say, to quantify. The best way to quantify is to say that the catalog business I represent effectively represents the largest label within the music group. So I can't really quantify how much of our total revenue comes from catalog, but if you looked at, we have labels like Interscope and Island Def Jam that are among the largest music labels in the world. And the catalog division overall effectively is a larger label in itself. So it's a tremendous source of revenue and income, not only for the company, but for the artists who effectively comprise that catalog. Prior to 1999, nobody focused on catalog separately from new product. In fact, at every company, and at the time there were 6 major music labels, music companies, catalog was sort of a secondary afterthought that record labels marketed in conjunction with the new release of albums. So if you had an album coming out by a band like a U2 or an Eminem or anyone like that, you'd market their catalog sort of alongside that to sort of take advantage of the entire marketing push you were doing with the artist. What happened in 1999 is the dynamic of the business changed. Universal and Polygram merged, forming the world's largest record company, and decided to take a drastic step to change the model and how the business was done, and formed this company, Universal Music Enterprises, with the goal to market catalog with what I will call a frontline approach or a frontline mentality. And by that I mean to treat catalog with the same frontline passion that labels market current product. Because in the past it was an afterthought. So maybe the same marketing commitment in terms of dollars didn't go behind catalog, but the same passion would go behind it. And we hired a staff of people who effectively market catalog for a living as opposed to doing it as part of their job, and effectively treat it with that same passion as you would treat frontline product. What happened was the catalog sales at Universal, at the merged company, rose dramatically over what they were when you took the 2 separate companies pre-merger and added them together. Meaning putting this concentrated effort of resources into catalog as opposed to leaving it segregated among the labels who were selling the artist's frontline records had a dramatic effect and increased catalog sales dramatically. It changed the model because ultimately over the next 6 years, there's now 4 majors. The other 3 majors have all adopted similar models. And the results have been clear at every one of these companies. So that's effectively what we've done in terms of marketing catalog. What it did is it creates concentrated resources, not just personnel and not just concentrated money, but people who are dedicated toward taking the Guns N' Roses greatest hits when you put it out, and driving it to consumers with the same passion and commitment that a new record by Guns N' Roses would be driven by its label. It had never been done before, and it's proven to be very successful for the companies and for the artists. In terms of where we get our catalog, obviously the easiest part is we take the catalog that exists in our vaults, and that's a big part of what we do. But over the years, one of the big things we've done, and I think every company has now done this, is look to acquire catalogs that become available. There's fewer majors and there's fewer independents. The business is definitely consolidating. So, for example, a few years ago, we were aware that the Motley Crue catalog, which was independently owned by the band Motley Crue, was available for some sort of acquisition or licensing deal. And we went at, this was before Motley Crue even got together, and we went and acquired it for a significant amount of money that seemed, to some extent, a bit of a risk at the time. What happened since then is not only were we able to take a catalog that had sort of never been marketed in a cohesive fashion and put it together, the band reformed, went out on tour, we were able to tie in with the band and formed a bond with them, and it became a big, huge opportunity, which has generated, again, lots of income for us, lots of income for the band, and created a lot of great product for the fans. So we're constantly looking out There's a number of catalogs that have been acquired over the years. Warner's over the past couple years has acquired the Chicago catalog. There's catalogs that are currently being negotiated by a couple of the majors right now that for artists who have been either marketing their own catalog or have gotten reversions, they've gotten their catalog back. So it's constantly on our mind to look for new catalogs. Sometimes individual albums, other times literally entire catalogs that we go after. Sometimes we buy them and actually own them. Other times we'll license them, like in the case of Motley Crue, where we made a long-term license agreement. Prefer to buy when it's available. Not some artists want to either keep ownership, or whoever owns the catalog does not want to give up complete ownership. We like to view ourselves as buyers, not sellers. We rarely, if ever, give up assets. By the same token, we don't like to sit on them. We like to be aggressive in marketing them, but we're always in the market for music catalogs. To purchase, licensing is a viable alternative when purchase isn't available. I would say that we do not typically do short-term deals because, to be frank, in order to really maximize opportunities and value, we view marketing plans as long-term efforts. We're not in the business of one-offs in the putting out records and walking away. When we develop a plan for an artist's catalog, Motley Crue is a perfect example. We developed a 5 to 10 year plan in order to deliver releases into the marketplace and to market those releases. And ultimately, that makes a lot more sense because if you have a short-term approach or a one-off approach, you effectively have a very short window to operate your business, and the asset isn't nearly as valuable to you, and to be frank, it's not as valuable to the artist. We view marketing an artist as involving a number of things. One, we believe there's a number of different types of consumers to capture. Everybody from the hardcore fan to the person you need to introduce to that artist. That said, you also have to look at the changing dynamic of the marketplace. People buy records in different places. Hardcore fans still walk into the few remaining record stores. Casual music buyers may never walk into a record store and may capture their music in a Walmart or in a Best Buy or in a Target when they're actually shopping for household goods or stereo equipment or TVs and not effectively looking for music. So what we do, first of all, is we create for any artist product that can be marketed in each of those particular places. So for example, we believe there's really 4 different ways to market greatest hits for an artist. There's the full-priced single album greatest hits. There's the double album greatest hits. There's the mid-price greatest hits. And there's the box set. And let me explain what each of those for. The box set appeals is a collector's item for the most hardcore fan. If you do an Elton John box set, that's for somebody who probably owns everything that's available from Elton John, or a Bruce Springsteen box set, etc. You're not going to seduce new fans into the marketplace with a box set, but you're going to satiate the appetite for the most hardcore fans. By the same token, at the other extreme, there are people who are not into artists, whether it be U2, Elton John, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, it doesn't matter who it is. Or they're only casually into them. And what we've done is we believe in order to capture those people, and they're more likely people who are going to be shopping at the big box stores, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Kmarts, maybe the Best Buys, who don't carry a lot of music product anyway. We believe the way to capture them is through midline product, and that's a lower priced product, not lower quality, lower price, with fewer tracks, sort of at an introductory level. We actually have created a line called the 20th Century Masters line, which is actually a branded series we created, which is the most successful branded series created thus far in the music business. We've sold over 30 million CDs by taking greatest hits for at sort of an intro level, and instead of having them placed in the bins under the artist's name, where we feel it's really useless for the casual consumer because they're not really looking for these artists, we created a common look, the 20th Century Masters look. Every album has a similar cover with a different photo, with the artist's photo on it, but a similar look. And we actually created our own permanent displays, which we provide to the stores, so that when you walk into Best Buy or Walmart or Kmart or Target, you don't have to look for these artists. The permanent display that we keep stocked and have rotated among various, there's several hundred albums in this, and we rotate 40 of them at a time through these bins. They're in the front of the store at a very reasonable price for the casual buyer. 11 or 12 tracks instead of the 16 or 18 tracks that a full-price single-disc greatest hits would have, and has been incredibly successful for us. The single-disc greatest hits is really for the real greatest hits fan. You like Elton John, you like Sheryl Crow, you like Guns N' Roses. That's the record that probably has their 16 greatest hits. The double greatest hits, it's a little bit more money, and that's for somebody who's a little bit more of a fan and wants to go beyond the traditional greatest hits. We believe there's an independent market for each of those. What's interesting is that when you look, there used to be a philosophy that, gee, if you put a greatest hits out at a mid-price, aren't you really cannibalizing the full-price greatest hits because people can get a similar product for a lot less money? We've done a lot of research, and what happens is every time we put out a mid-price greatest hits that we advertise heavily on an artist, we actually see an increase in the sales of their full-price greatest hits. And the reason is because, one, you're doing some heavy advertising, but more importantly, different consumers are finding these records in different places. The places that sell mid-price product are not the places that sell full-price product. One is a more traditional record store product. The other is more likely to be sold in a place that doesn't carry traditional record product. And by segmenting the consumer, you cannot make consumers walk into stores they're not willing to walk into. The days of thinking you'll put out a great product, if you build it, they will come. If you build it, they will not come. It's tough enough to build it, but they will not come. So the key is to marketing music is to forget about trying to suck people into the stores for a particular piece of product. The thing is to try to capture consumers in their place where they do business. That's the theory behind selling music in Starbucks. Starbucks is not really in the music business per se. They're in the business of selling coffee. But record companies have recognized that Starbucks makes a great partnership because they're attracting a consumer who's not walking into a record store, who's not comfortable in a record store. So certain types of particularly adult-oriented music sells very well there because you have a captive audience. You don't have to attract the consumer you want who's already walking into a Starbucks, and that's why it's been a successful partnership for a lot of records. And it's the same theory we have in marketing music, greatest hits music. Capture, the casual consumer is going to be in Walmart. The serious music buyer is not necessarily combing the music bins in Walmart. They're more likely to be in Virgin or in Tower, the few stores that remain. Or if you're in LA, in Amoeba Music or one of those places that really appeals towards that avid consumer. And that's where you take your more intricate product. I don't want to say necessarily higher price, but product that requires a lot more knowledge about an artist. And I view, the midline product we do as an introduction to an artist. The box set is the ultimate artist experience, and then there's something, in between for everyone. Getting back to what I was saying, when we create a marketing plan around an artist, is we really have a multi-tiered approach. It's not one record fits all. And because we're in the business of satisfying consumer demand and building a brand, we have to build that brand a little bit differently. GM doesn't make one car for every consumer. They make a lot of cars. So we have to take a brand, Elton John, and create different Elton John records for various consumers, much like an automobile company would. The difference is that we have a living, breathing brand, and we have to do it in conjunction in working with that artist and the brand. So everything we develop, typically, we're working in conjunction with the artist to make sure it fits his or her image, his or her brand, because they're also out touring and performing under that brand. In addition, at the same time, we've developed ancillary things we do to help market music. You mentioned film and TV licensing. Film and TV licensing was originally developed as an income source. You put music in films and television shows, and you effectively have a source of additional income, which is great. We have found that it is as much a source of marketing and promotion as it is income. And when you do at the right time, when you use film and TV licensing as both a marketing tool and an income tool, you maximize a lot of opportunities you couldn't have done before. The best example I can think of is a number of years ago, about 3-4 years ago, we launched a record called Elton John Greatest Hits 1970 to 1990 to 2002, 1970 to 2002, which was a comprehensive double disc of Elton John's greatest hits. There have been several other greatest hits, but this at the time was the most comprehensive. We needed a way to market it, and we realized radio wasn't going to work. It typically doesn't work in Catalogue because the reality is there's nothing new to play on radio. TV per se in terms of videos didn't work because aside from there being very few video outlets, there's nothing new about any of the music on this record, so there's no videos. Yes, Elton's out there touring, playing these songs, but there's nothing unique about that. He does that every year, and he does hundreds and hundreds of shows. We decided we needed a way to get this music inside people's heads to make them thinking about it. So we went to all 4 major TV networks. And we're launching the record coincidentally during these sweeps periods when they were doing their heavy advertising. We convinced 3 of the 4 networks to use effectively only Elton John music in the promos they were for all their major TV shows they were promoting during sweeps week. So for example, there was a show, Scrubs, a very big show, network show. Scrubs happened to in sweeps be advertising that Heather Locklear had a guest appearance on one of their shows. And they put in the background of every commercial showing Heather Locklear, Elton John's The Bitch Is Back. Which, great song, couldn't be more appropriate. And had in the background, didn't do anything other than have it in a commercial that ran, I would say, over the course of sweeps, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times nationwide. We did this with a dozen Elton John songs on dozens of commercials running hundreds of times a day for sweeps period, which was literally a 2-week period. Never announced we were doing this promotion, but launched the album and sold, I believe, 100,000 double CDs our first week. Probably the largest week we'd ever had with an Elton John catalog record in 30 years. And what was interesting is we sort of did some unscientific research, and what we found out is that people were saying for some reason they were singing these Elton John songs in their head. My own wife came to me and said, why do I feel like I'm hearing Elton John music everywhere I go? And I said, because you are. And it was sort of a not quite subliminal, but we managed to figure out a way to get music. By the way, we got paid for these commercials. So we actually created a source of revenue for us and for Elton John, but more importantly, we found a way to use television advertising to market music. This was actually much more effective than many people prefer to use film licensing because films pay a lot more for music. But a film I licensed to, may not come out for 6 months or 8 months. By putting it into sweeps, I got less money per use, but I was able to have it on the air in many cases within 2 hours of working out the license. I mean, we were working out licenses, and we have a crew of 11 people who just do this. This is all they do, plays music in films, television shows, and video games. They were making deals at 5 o'clock in the evening for TV commercials that were going to be airing at 7 and 8. I mean, it was incredibly effective as a marketing tool. And what was great is that we actually convinced, in that case, the artist, Elton John, who had been very protective of how we use his music. He's a very sophisticated business person, not just a great artist, who saw the benefits of it and the value of it as a marketing and promotional tool, not just an income tool, and gave us carte blanche to do this because we needed to be able to make decisions in the spur of the moment. This couldn't be something where we went through tons of consents. And what was really, I think, intelligent of Elton, who was very protective of his music, is he recognized that we had a partnership, we had a common interest. And this is one of the things that I think has really worked for us in terms of Catalogue. I don't use the word, we don't exploit music, because I think it's a bad word. We market music and we market artists. And that's something I think that's essential to our success, that we've kind of built a bond and a partnership that an Elton John could say, I trust you to go out and do this. You're not, quote unquote, exploiting me. You're actually helping my brand. To put music, to synchronize music on TV or in a movie or in a video game, both the record company and the publisher has to issue a license. The case of Elton John's a classic example. We created a partnership with the publisher. Now, at the time, we were fortunate because a big majority of the publishing is published by Universal Music Publishing for Elton John. Not always as easy as it sounds. They're an independent company. We had to sit down with them and work out an arrangement where we could do this. We have a great partnership with them. They agreed to do it. Elton gave them the authority to work with us, and we did it. But we work with every music publisher out there. Some are more cooperative than others. In this case, to do what we did in the case of Elton John, we could not have done without the complete publishing authority that Elton had given us. Had the publisher not been cooperative, or had they been less cooperative, we wouldn't have been able to cut deals on several hours' notice. The relationships we have with the publishers are essential in that business. This is a huge business. It's one of the biggest, synchronization is still one of the bigger growth businesses in the industry. Certainly of the traditional businesses. Put aside the internet for a moment. If you look at the traditional businesses, whether it be brick and mortar sales, licensing, compilations, etc., the one business that seems to be in a growth mode still is synchronization. Films still use much music. TV shows obviously do, and video games have become an additional and significant source of both income and promotion for music. Downloading, unfortunately, has had two horrible effects on this business. One, the piracy has cannibalized music in general. People who would never in their wildest imagination walk into a record store and stick a CD in their pocket and walk out have no qualms about downloading off the internet, because to be frank, they're growing up in a world, they don't think of it, it's an intangible. It's not they're saying, hey, I'm going to steal. Most people don't think of it as stealing, and even if they do, they figure the odds or ramifications of getting caught are relatively rare and significant. So the one problem is the cannibalization in general. The other problem that I think downloading has created is, maybe it's related to the cannibalization, is it's forced a change in the retail environment. The traditional record stores have basically been going under and out of business. They were already headed in that direction because, to be frank, the Best Buys, the Walmarts, the Kmarts were driving them out of business because people are going to those big box stores where you can buy anything you want, and you do all your shopping in one. But I think the cannibalization of the internet has speeded up a process that has been a bad thing for the retailers, a bad thing for the record industry, and a bad thing for the consumers, because the days of being able to walk into a record store and browse through 30,000 titles are basically over. Walmart only carries a few thousand titles. Best Buy only carries 5,000 titles. When I was a kid, I spent every Saturday in a record store in Philadelphia, sometimes maybe 5-6 hours, even if I didn't buy anything, but I was looking and absorbing and going through LPs and et cetera. There's no real opportunity to do that other than on the internet today. The good thing is you can look at a lot more on the internet. The bad thing is, because you can't touch it and feel it, you're probably not spending as much time or as much passion on any particular one item. What is good about the internet from Catalogue, though, and it's great, is it's in terms of opportunities, it's like being a painter and having suddenly a much bigger easel or a much bigger canvas. The reality is, when a store only carries 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 records, what that means is they're carrying the hit product, they're carrying the top product, they're not carrying a lot of product. You go into most places to sell records today, and I'll go back, I keep coming back to Elton John just because it's a handy example. Elton John has probably 30 gold and platinum albums. But if you walked into any record store, you'd be lucky to find 3 different ones, at most. Why? Because they don't have the space. When you only carry 5,000 or 3,000 records and you have all these great artists, you can't carry that much. The internet allows us to carry not only all 30 albums, but the internet allows us to carry albums you'd never find in a record store. Because the reality is, there's certain records that, while they may be of some interest to some people, they're not of such general interest that it's not worth a company pressing up copies and marketing it and distributing it all over the country. Well, the cost of putting music up on the internet is relatively insignificant. And because it's insignificant, the amount of money and effort you can make to market records that never would have been marketed in the brick and mortar world is much more significant. So I can put up music now that's much deeper in my vaults that I never would have gotten to in a traditional reissue world. So whereas, you take older artists like Chuck Berry, and you asked about catalogs. A number of years ago, I was involved in acquiring the Chess catalog, which is Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, Muddy Waters. I wanted to I think it was the first major catalog acquisition I did when I got into the business. there's a lot of music there that is never going to sell thousands and thousands of units just because it's older blues music, it's roots music, it's not as mass appealing. We can now take that music on the internet and we can market it much more effectively to a much wider range of people because it doesn't take you don't have the limitations that you have when trying to get it into the physical marketplace. For example, Best Buy or Walmart wouldn't even carry those titles because they don't turn over enough. They're in the business of turning over product, and they don't want to take product that won't sell a certain amount of units. The internet doesn't discriminate like that. Whether it's iTunes, whether it's Amazon, whether it's internet sites we set up ourselves, it's limitless in terms of what we can put up, and that's the wonderful thing about the internet. We do have to, from my perspective, really police the internet in terms of piracy and in terms of illegal peer-to-peer, because what's happening is the number of people who are losing out through this piracy is much broader than people think. It's not about greedy record companies losing out, and it's not about we're making too much money. It's about artists who aren't getting paid. It's about writers who aren't getting paid. It's about people who are being laid off across this industry, and I'm talking about secretaries, clerical workers, people who work in the vaults, people who work at every level of this business, because money is, instead of being steered into the proper place, is effectively disappearing through what is really theft, but isn't necessarily thought of as theft. And it's had a dramatic effect. This is one of those great things that I think the internet has allowed us to do. About a year ago, we decided we wanted to be at the forefront of doing something different. We created something we call UME Digital, which was the first all downloading label, internet downloading only label started by a major record company. Why'd we do it? Again, it ties into the reasons I just mentioned in terms of music that there isn't a place for in the traditional marketplace. There's a number of artists out there. Many of them are not primary artists who are out there touring necessarily with their own bands, but in many cases it's artists who are already on tour with other artists. They may be the guitar player in Paul McCartney's band, and somebody who's a session player or is touring with a number of bands, who actually are creating a lot of the great music, and often they sell the music on the road at their own shows. But to be frank, they don't have a broad enough base to ever get signed to a major record company or to get a major retailer to stock their record, because again, there's a limited amount of space at retail. So we started UME Digital basically with the idea that we would take artists who really have a limited sales base today, but are constantly on the road, and some of these artists are on the road 200 days a year, 225 days a year, out there touring, building a base, and make their music available, usually entire albums, in a downloading world only through iTunes and the various companies, so that we can market their music around their tours. It's instantly accessible to anybody who wants to buy their music. And the thought is that not only are they effectively in the business of selling their music and being compensated for it, but if they build a big enough base, we're positioned to take their music into the traditional brick and mortar world as well. For many artists, it may be their best opportunity not only to sell their music other than on tour itself where they sell physical product, but to introduce themselves ultimately into the physical market. It's not about signing well-known artists. It's not about signing artists, who've had record deals and have fallen out of those deals. It's really about artists who are out there working, and it's sort of the working man's label. It's for artists working every day who have no viable way to sort of take their music other than from city to city. And in the past, for these artists, literally the only way you could get their music was an artist is playing your town, go to the show. After the show, they're selling the music. This allows us, primarily through press generated through reviews of these shows, etc., to pitch this music to a much wider crowd. And it's really a startup venture, but I believe it's one of the great things about the internet. Suddenly artists who could never have records in record stores are in the record business. They have music out there. They're making records and they're selling records, not in the quantities that U2 is selling records, not in the quantities that Mariah Carey is selling records, but they're in the game. And the toughest thing about this business is getting your foot in the door and finding your place. And when you're in the game, that's the first step. And if we can help them take the next step, that's a good thing. It's not a money-making venture of any significance for the record company or for the artist yet, but effectively is giving another shot or a shot to artists who otherwise wouldn't have had a shot in the traditional world. So that's, one of the really nice things that I think the internet offers. I actually went the traditional route into the music business, college, law school, the whole thing. I'm kidding, not the traditional route. I spent my entire life wanting to become a lawyer, mostly because I watched TV my whole life where it really looked cool to be a lawyer. Then I went to law school. Then I practiced law for a year, and I said, oh my God, this is not for me. I actually started practicing law, and for 12 months spent every day figuring out my exit strategy, how I would get out of it. I always loved music. When I was in college, I put myself through, a big part of how I put myself through college was through selling merchandising T-shirts at rock concerts. Not necessarily legally. When I became a lawyer, I immediately stopped myself. I sent myself a cease and desist letter. I now work with bands today, and who I probably ripped off back then, and whenever I can, I take them to lunch or to dinner just to kind of pay them back for what I may have stolen from them in the past. So I'd always had a passion for the music business. I decided the best way to transition, and I wanted to get into the music business. I actually took a job in business affairs at MCA Records in 1983 after practicing law for a year, knowing nothing about the music business other than, having been a fan, sold T-shirts, etc. Somebody took a chance on me. I got in there. I remember the first day I came, I interviewed. I said, I want this job. Here's how much money I make. You can cut this salary any way you want. I'll take less, no problem. All my legal experience thrown out the window. I negotiated myself downward. Took a chance because it was important to me. Did business affairs for a couple years. Worked at MCA Records under, at the time, Irving Azoff and Zach Horowitz, who hired me. And after about a couple years of doing business affairs, about 2 years, Irving and Zach came to me and said, gee, maybe they recognized a particular talent in me, or they wanted me out of business affairs, or they realized I was never going to be a good lawyer. They said, gee, we'd like to start sort of a division to sort of find different ways to generate money through our assets. Nobody was really doing this back in the 80s. And it was a business that ultimately became called the special markets business. And they said, do you think you could do this? And I said, I'm not sure I want to do this. I've gone to law school, I'm doing business affairs. And they said, we'll give you a 10% raise. And I said, okay. So basically, for what was a very insignificant amount of money, I decided to change the course of my career. I started a special markets division for MCA Records, and started taking basically the recordings, et cetera, and licensing them out to third people and generating money. And before we knew it, over a couple years, we started generating tens and tens of millions of dollars in additional money for the company, for the artist, et cetera, through all kinds of non-traditional things, licensing music to other record companies. At the time, there were companies like Catalogues you licensed to. We developed this film and TV licensing business, et cetera. We weren't even doing anything with the catalog yet. It was basically just licensing and things like that. Over the years, in building that business, I just started to get some different ideas and started doing compilation albums and expanding into sort of the label side of the business as well as the licensing business, and just grew it there and developed sort of a niche business that grew and grew from a small business into a business that ultimately became what is Universal Music Enterprises and generates hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. I think the break for me was that I got caught in this merger between Polygram and Universal, creating this world's largest company, and it just, it just opened the door, and that's when Zach Horowitz, who was the COO of the company, had originally came up with the idea to create this centralized catalog company, handed the ball to me. I started when I started in '86 doing this, I had 3 people. Today I have a company with about 110 people, 115 people. All who are overworked, they tell me, but they are generating a significant amount of money that not only I think is good for the company, But the money that we make through the catalog, and this is something I can't stress enough, is really the money that funds the development of new artists. I mean, that's the most important thing about catalog. It's not that it makes money for us. It's not that it makes money for the artists. It's that really at every major music company, the money generated by the catalog provides the wealth that allows you to go out and develop talent, because it costs us millions and millions of dollars to develop talent. Record companies do not make money in the development stage of artists. And very few artists, get to that point where they're tremendously successful. It takes a lot of money to get artists, you need talent, but it takes a lot of clout from the company marketing in order to help the artists, take that talent and get it out to the world.